So yeah, I work for Plymouth Low Carbon Team as well as Plymouth Energy Community. So the Low Carbon Team, it focuses on running projects in the city that try to tackle emissions from all those sectors that aren't really controlled by Plymouth City Council. So households, businesses, community organisations, and that sort of thing. So we try to run projects in that space. We're not about managing Plymouth council housing or kind of infrastructure in the city that belongs to the council. We do get involved in that and support that, but it's not our primary role. And so I want to really talk about the relationship between these two organisations, Plymouth Energy Community and Plymouth City Council, because I think if there's something that I would say is unique in Plymouth, that's what is unique. That's what's key to our success, I think, in lots of areas. So that's got to start with how Plymouth Energy Community was formed. It was a manifesto commitment in 2012 for the party that got elected. They wanted to create a series of cooperatives in the city to tackle issues, and the kind of flagship one of those was an energy cooperative to deal with a range of issues, and those three images that you can all see and I can't try and explain what those are. That would be how we would have presented it in the time. And the role where was to bring together people in the city who care about issues of energy, and those people, those 100 members that formed Plymouth Energy Community, they typically were really concerned with people not being able to afford to heat their homes in winter, with having very large companies who are making very high profits from a system that isn't allowing people to afford to heat their homes in the winter. And we're trying to encourage renewable energy within the city. And so 100,000 members came together to form this organisation and to elect a board to oversee this organisation. And the council's role in supporting that was to provide council officer time. So there was a lot of free council officer time put in there at the start to look at how that strategy can evolve for that organisation, to support them from going through the process of becoming an accredited organisation, and to kind of work through some funding bids to get in the funding to allow us to start doing that kind of work. So there was an investment there from the council in supporting that organisation and nurturing that organisation to begin with. If we go to the next slide. So nowadays we express the ambitions in a slightly more clear, slightly more adult way, I'd say, maybe slightly more, some kind of carefully chosen words there. I think we look at it in a different way. The organisation's grown a lot, Plymouth Energy Community, in those years, and the role of that with the council has changed slightly, and actually the council are no longer subsidising that organisation, and it's increased its reach a lot more. We now have over 1,000 members. If we go to the next slide. So as I said, PEC's a fully autonomous organisation, but actually it still buys in its staff time from the council. And what this leads to is a situation where what we describe as the low carbon city team as a whole has got 19 people working in it. Of those, roughly 10 full-time equivalent people actually work for Plymouth Energy Community. So rather than Plymouth Energy Community having a completely different staff resource, we've almost combined that staff resource with the council. And that allows for a lot of greater specialism within that team. If you can imagine, if you're trying to run an organisation with a team of 10 individuals, you're not likely to be able to have lots of different specialisms, where if you've got a team of 19 individuals, you can get people who are really specialists at renewable energy and electric vehicles, and others that are really specialists at doing fuel poverty work and energy efficiency work. And rather than PEC employing somebody wholesale, they employ me, for example, for about 80% of my time. And the council use about 20% of my time. And that really builds this sort of centre of excellence, really, that can support both organisations, allows both organisations to do a better job. And it also creates a really close working relationship where we understand, both organisations understand each other's aims and abilities really well in terms of forming partnerships. So go to the next slide. In terms of just to give a little bit more information about what PEC has done to date, and then I'm just going to run through a couple of case studies which kind of show how that partnership works really well. So PEC as an organisation principally done two areas of work really in the last 7 years. So the first of those is community-owned solar in the city. There's over 6 megawatts of community-owned solar resource in the city on some roofs in the city, but also in that picture, a 5 megawatt kind of solar array on a piece of land in the edge of the city. So that has lots of benefits. It provides dividends back to local people who've invested as shareholders. It displaces fossil fuel generation with renewable generation. It provides cheaper energy bills to the or ground rents to the host sites. So those are community organisations or community businesses or schools or something like that, which are now benefiting financially. And over the lifetime of those installations, there'll be hundreds of thousands of pounds of community benefit fund, which would be, profit in other businesses' terms. But in this case, that profit goes into a community benefit fund that will help vulnerable people. So a lot of that will go into fuel poverty work, but some of it will go into other work in the city. Alongside that work, we've secured quite a lot of grant funding to deliver fuel poverty work. This winter, we'll have 7 specialist fuel poverty advisors delivering work with the most vulnerable people in the city. And that work is really focused on energy and energy efficiency and improving that situation. But to be really clear, that's not what we go into people's homes or speak to people about when we first come to them. We take a really open approach. We've seen a lot of organisations during times of austerity really close down their services, to be really specific. So, actually we just deal with applying for that particular benefit or these things, and we won't deal with any other issues that you have. And that's left a lot of households, particularly the most vulnerable ones, really not being able to manage the different organisations I might need to go to improve their situation. So our approach is to walk into a home or to pick up the phone to somebody with a really open book there and say, what are your issues? And maybe the first 3 things that they see as their greatest needs at the moment are nothing to do with energy. And our job then is to work with that household and other organisations in the city to address those needs. But we find that usually once you get 3 or 4 points down the kind of list of things that people need help with, energy starts to come into it, and that's where our advisors really, do the most of their work. But I think that kind of approach is really important. If we move on to the next slide. So there's just some metrics. In fact, these are about a year out of date because I'm about to update them for the last year, but they give a bit of an idea of the kind of scale of work that we do in the city. So the financial savings we generated there, so nearly £500,000 in financial savings. That's what people will save within the first year of having received advice from us. And so it's kind of real impact that can be had on some people's lives. Gives an impression of that. So if we go on to the next slide. So this is the first of my 2 case studies, if you like, and looking at kind of low carbon retrofit in the city. And this one I want to pick up because it's actually not one in which Plymouth Energy Community and Plymouth City Council have any direct relationship at all. There's no contract that we're delivering something together, nothing like that. But in the UK, there is a nationally driven retrofit scheme for kind of low-income households called the Energy Company Obligation, and that provides grants. It's a market-led scheme, so essentially lots of different installers across the country can access grants to do this, and their job is to go out there and sell it. And because it's been established in that way, you do get a lot of mis-selling. You also get a lot of work completed that is not up to a reasonable standard, to be honest. So it does have some issues, that scheme, I think, nationally. Local authorities have the power to play quite a good regulatory role because they can allow certain households who wouldn't be eligible under the national scheme to be eligible. They can declare, actually, we think that person is in fuel poverty and therefore they should be eligible. So that essentially increases the market for installers. And they can also sometimes offer, well, Plymouth City Council does offer top-up funding as well. So where those national grant scheme doesn't cover the full cost of the work, they can top up those funds to make it essentially easier to convert leads for an installer, because that would be offered for free. A lot of local authorities, because they have that kind of role, have chosen to close down that market and say, actually, we don't want to see the mis-selling, we don't want to see the poor quality work. And the way we will try to address that is by partnering with a single installer. Often I don't see that approach works particularly well, and the council take a completely different approach in Plymouth and say this should be an entirely open market. We will provide those top-up funds and we will sign off eligibility for any installer that's working in the city unless we have evidence that they're not working in a way that we would support. and that does happen. And at that point, they stop getting that support. And the advantage of that open market approach is it means that a lot more money is spent in Plymouth than other local authorities for energy company obligation. Plymouth is a very good place to do business if you're a installer who wants to install, installation under this national grant scheme. And so we do see more work going ahead in Plymouth. The downside of that is, like a lot of local markets, probably the most vulnerable people don't really get the support they need, and that regulator who can kind of draw off that support for companies needs to get a really good access to information in the city, and actually that's where PEC come in really well. We have no relationship with Plymouth City Council in this scheme, we've got no contract with them, but because we deliver advice and support in the city, we handhold the most vulnerable customers through eco schemes and help them to find good installers and to manage that work and deal with any issues. We also have our ear to the ground. So quite recently, the council have withdrawn support for one particular installer, largely as a base of feedback we've provided about their mis-selling. So we've got that kind of, the ecosystem that exists in the city means that we're able to kind of have that sort of open market approach. It means, frankly, just more insulation is going into homes in Plymouth than in a lot of other local authorities, and that's a really good thing. But equally, because of the relationship between those two organisations, there's an element of policing of that, and there's an element of making sure that the most vulnerable don't lose out on that, and that needs both the local authority playing their role, but also a local organisation, a charity organisation that know their way around these topics of energy, who can play a completely different role. If we go to the next slide, and this is again just another case study of how those two organisations have worked together really well. This is a project which is actually the one that Lavinia mentioned earlier when kind of introducing me. So it was a European Regional Development funded project. It delivered so it was an £800,000 project to deliver advice in neighbourhoods in the city. And to be frank, that is not something that Plymouth Energy Community could ever have bid for at that time. We were a smaller organisation than we are now, and those ERDF funded, Interreg funded projects are pretty sizable in terms of the development time needed to make that happen. But it is the kind of thing that Plymouth City Council are quite used to doing and have the expertise to do. And so they bid in for this and won the bid to do this work, energy efficiency work in low income communities in Plymouth. But actually, when it comes to delivering that work, it's not well suited to a council. What we were looking to do really is partner with lots of local installers. You've got to be quite fleet of foot and manage that project as you go along quite well. Those are the kind of things that actually councils don't do hugely well. And so there was a procurement process. PEC were awarded the contract to deliver that. And that was a really strong kind of community-led scheme in the end, which I don't think it could have been if it was delivered by a council, or certainly not as well. So the outcomes of that were really amazing in terms of the amount of things we installed, and the kind of savings to residents and that sort of things. But also there's lots of kind of small elements about the fact that we're going to a home and saying we're a membership organisation. As well as kind of receiving the support from us, you can become a member, you can get involved with various things. So we had householders who'd received measures under the scheme going into other homes and fitting measures. Householders were very able to do that work, and we were sure they could do that work competently. We're going on to fit measures in other households so that we could do more with the funding we had. And we also had the kind of news of the scheme spreading like wildfire through some communities with word of mouth, which I think was a lot around it being delivered by a kind of community-owned organisation that they, as part of their intervention, had become a member of and felt some ownership over. So again, it's another project where I don't think that project could have been landed and delivered in that way by either Plymouth City Council or Plymouth Energy Community on their own. And it was that ecosystem, both organisations working really closely together, that managed to deliver that work and deliver some really good outcomes. So final slide. And this is just really to run through how that relationship has continued to develop in the city and the really good work that's doing. So we've got a project going on at the moment where it's a Plymouth City Council led project, because they were the only, it's only a council that could bid into that funding, but it's taking Plymouth Energy Community's advisors, specialist advisors, and it's basing them right in the heart of the council's procured health and social care provider, so the organisation that's providing all the health, outreach health and social care work within the city. And in the UK, there's been a lot of conversation for years about how cold homes cause poor health. And so a lot of those sort of health and social care organisations ought to be looking more at cold homes as an issue they could tackle. But there hasn't been an awful lot of action on that. And it's been difficult to get those organisations to start funding work to tackle poor health through tackling poor housing. So this is an example of a project where we can actually embed ourselves within one of those organisations and prove ourselves for what we can do and the amazing outcomes we can provide. And you know, we've helped 300 households under that scheme, and the average, you know, saving in a year following advice for that scheme is nearly £1,000. So those households, you know, some of the most vulnerable households in the city, in really poor health, are saving, you know, the best part of £1,000 in a year after they're getting advice from us. That will make a huge difference to their stress levels, to their ability to heat their home, and that's massive. We're also evolving in new ways. The council have an ambitious plan for delivering housing in the city. They're planning to grow the city, and MPEC have established a housing developer, a net zero community-led affordable housing developer in the city to really work in combination, you know, to really help them deliver those aims for the city. And there's some really, you know, interesting projects going on there, getting a lot of support and a lot of funding. And finally, we've just also managed to bring together, you know, we've done a lot of work around low carbon retrofit separately. We brought that work together for a bid in the summer to deliver grant funded home improvement work. And there is a partnership that has just been funded to deliver about £3 million worth of grant funded home improvement work over this winter. So yeah, that relation, and that's all kind of evidence really of how that relationship has matured and how those two organisations have managed to work together around their shared objectives in a way that has delivered really great work in the city.